Fonda, as you mentioned, and Alex, I brought up when you were last speaking about the more like holistic side of nature, the holistic nature of martial arts and how it can sort of more broadly play into a fighter's, greater outlook on life. And Kay, you mentioned earlier when you were doing Aikido in the parking lot and stuff, you're doing meditation. Excuse me. And so there's this spiritual side to martial arts as well. And I think that's really important because it's like it's the fighter's mindset, but the fighter's mindset doesn't necessarily just apply to a specific arena. It can broaden out into a greater outlook on life and, relationships and all kinds of different aspects. So, Kay, I'll start with you, since you were speaking about it earlier in terms of meditation and that kind of thing. How does martial art practice, or how did it play into your spirituality, and how does that kind of continued into your outlook on life? And, does it appear in your stories as well? And if so, what does it add to the nature of it?
So the school that trained me, it was actually like it emphasized the spiritual holistic side of martial arts, like to a frightening degree. Basically, you can get thrown out of the school for not, subscribing to these ideals, because the way the founder wanted to emphasize on is that, you're not there to beat people up. It's self-defense. It's supposed to get you out of dangerous situations. And so basically, you don't get into fights for points. You don't get into fights for trophies. It was one of those schools that, like, it was almost, they this was very important. Like, the mindset was very important. So, like, before we started the exercises, there would be like this story time where they would talk about, the people who were bragging, and then they disabled them from just with like 2 or 3 quick moves. And so it stuck with me because this was my formative years. Like, I would think I was 10 or something, and then it just stuck with me that, like, you can learn to fight but not actually, look for fights.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that translated, like into my writing, I actually really started to question how a lot of fiction or a lot of stories, they see violence as the means to an end, right? Like we were talking about the Marvel movies, like they just do destruction, like they just wreck the city because this guy was wrong.
And it's like, how many people died there, man?
I do like that they started to like question that too, right?
Yeah.
That's like in the later media.
Mm-hmm.
So, overall, the way I approach my writing is that, is this aggression necessary? And so usually, if I do end up writing a violent fight, it's usually because the character is trying to get out and they're not being allowed to get out. And it's like, with the exception of bad guys, the bad guys, I really go nuts with the show of power with the bad guys, because it's fun. But the framing of it, the framing of all the scenes, is I seem to go back to how I was taught from the very beginning. It's that, is this necessary? You train and you get strong so that you don't, like somebody else can't hurt you. You can get out of a bad situation. Like, you use your environment to your advantage so that you can remove the thing that could hurt you.
Yeah, and despite being a very capable character, she's a queen, and so people kind of underestimate her and that kind of thing. But she's never the one that's outright instigating, much of the violence. It's all being impressed upon her, but then she's still, using her physical capability, her mental capability to outwit her opponents, and, like you say, use the environment to come out on top. Yeah, and I really like that about it. Cool. And Alex, since I brought it up with you earlier, if you want to get in on the whole spiritual, holistic side of martial arts and how it, plays into your life, but as well as your fiction.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I've had an evolution with that over the past 20 years, where I think what, mixed martial arts and essentially, creating the UFC and these major fighting leagues, where essentially it became a sport, a very prominent global sport, is it dispelled a lot of the spirituality, which I think it had a lot of positives as well as some negatives. We've all seen the videos that are kind of sad of like, literally, old grandmasters that think they have some sort of, spiritual chakra power, fighting a mixed martial art fighter, and them actually believing they can, send a energy wave to them, and then them getting beat up, which is actually quite sad, but also I think very enlightening as far as how, delusional people can get, as well as students. And I think one thing that mixed martial arts as well as Brazilian jiu-jitsu has done is helped kind of dispel some of the less, less positive spiritual elements. But at the same time, I think it's kind of driven it in the opposite direction, where I do believe that there are a lot of spiritual elements that can be taken from martial arts that are extremely positive. I know for me personally, um, just the martial arts has given me so much, from, my work ethic and a lot of what Fonda was talking about, as far as, there being no real end to the journey. All of those lessons and ways of life have been had a really positive effect on my life. At the same time, when I'm teaching, I literally tell my students, listen to what I say about the techniques, what I'm teaching you. And even that, this is my body type. This is how I do things. It might not work
Yeah.
for you, but I'm teaching you what works for me. Don't listen to anything else I say. I'm literally an idiot. As far as you shouldn't listen. I mean, like, I'm like a blue belt
Humble.
parent, maybe blue belt 2-stripe parent. I know, I know a few other things, but I'm not someone that should be able to guide you in the various parts of your life. And I think that is a negative that has come from martial arts, as far as, students looking up to their teachers so much, almost in a cult like fashion, where they're,
Yes.
getting guidance on every single thing, even if it's not necessarily good or expert guidance. So that being said, I think, personally, martial arts does have a spiritual element for me, because, it puts me in a place that is almost, I feel like a child. It's almost like play. I think a lot of adults, when they get older, they don't learn. They've lost the ability to play. And for me, I see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I see grappling, I see martial arts as a form of play. Um, and, all things aside, self-defense aside, combat aside, I think, mammals are creatures that when you watch young mammals or even older mammals, they play fight. They learn to play fight with each other. And evolutionarily, that's really good, because they can't injure each other, too much. They need to learn the skills they need to learn, and they don't want to like hurt each other, because that would be, you know uh, you know they wouldn't be learning at that point. So I think adults, for me, being able to play, like, I tell my kids I'm going to play with my friends, and I actually think that has a big tie-in with writing for me, or at least I try to embrace that childlike, just love of writing, where you're making up stories, you're playing with your figurines, you're telling a story in your head, and I have to constantly retell myself that's what I'm doing when I'm writing, so that I still love it. And even though it's becoming a bigger part of my life, and writing as a professional, I think, can be difficult, because you see it as a job, and that can take the fun out of it. So I think there is a tie in there, as far as, martial arts as well as writing, being, for me at least, a form of play, trying to kind of get back to that childlike nature.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, because it's like, yeah, now that I have my young son, I'm just kind of reigniting my sense of play and just like the imagination that I have to convey in order for him to be excited and interacting with certain things. So it's like, you know, his need for play is also reigniting my need for play, and then I get to do things like this podcast and then writing as well. It's like, you know, we should never lose that sense of childlike wonder and play that we have for so long, but then a lot of people end up losing it when they get into adulthood, and it's just kind of like, you know, well shit, I'm stuck in a corporate office job, and there's no uh you know, there's no entry point for imagination or play fighting or any kind of stuff like that. And Sam, I'll toss it to you as well, just on the notion of, you know, the holistic side of martial arts, the spirituality, and how that plays into your life in fiction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I completely agree with Alex about the play factor, because I just think it's such a it just has such a releasing, amazing effect. Being able to
Hmm.
go from, you know, a hard day in the office or whatever, and then just going and rolling around on the ground with people. It's just it's what I was saying earlier. It's just there's something about martial arts that's just inherently fun to me.
Yeah.
Now, I very much grew up with martial arts in a completely unspiritual way. So the only kind of examples of martial arts as a spirituality came from me watching media in which it was portrayed that way. So the ones that I did were never like that at all. So I had very limited experience. So the karate style that I did was very much, there was a lot of bowing, like an obscene amount of bowing, and a lot of, you know, barking orders at people, and there's sort of a military kind of aspect to it, which I didn't love, because my early experiences have been shaped entirely with just mucking around with my brother and us just having a ball doing things, but there was kind of no sense of a deliberate hierarchy. And then when I switched to jiu-jitsu, it was such a contrast to me, because the club was so focused on practical self-defense, and there was no kind of sense of titles and bowing. You know, my instructors were called Maka and Tuck. It was like a different, very different thing from the sensei and lots of bowing and things that I've experienced in karate, and that really appealed to me. And the way that we run our club is very relaxed, and we're not religious, and we don't have a sort of an overt spirituality associated with the martial arts. But having said that, I still think that even when you're taking it as an entirely unmystical thing, entirely as a self-defense, fun thing that you do, you still do learn, and the way that your instructors teach still has an important kind of um, psychological shaping, if not overtly spiritual. Like, you still learn things about how to use force responsibly and how to treat people, and how to be respectful, even if that's not about, you know, barking orders or titles or bowing or anything. You still learn how to treat people with respect, and, you know, you being aware of your body and how you can harm people, I think, is really important. And so, like, even though martial arts has been something I've always loved, and I love watching it and I love doing it, um, I'm not a violent person at all. And one of the things I was trying to explore in the Poison Wall books was our kind of tendency to try to craft fantasy novels around the idea that violence is the solution, and that
Mm.
you solve problems exclusively through violence. And I was kind of deliberately trying to write a story in which that wasn't the answer, and the way to solve the problems wasn't through being stronger or faster, um, or beating the other person physically. And that's hard, I think, because I think a lot of the time
Yeah.
we're trained through the media that we consume, that especially American media, that you do win things by fighting. And it's a kind of weird dichotomy, because it's like, I love fighting. I love fighting so much. I love watching it. I love doing it. You know, I'm teaching my kids that. But I think for me, it's always felt like a thing that you enjoy doing in a controlled, fun environment, and you
Hmm.
you would be able to do if you had to, but you wouldn't seek it out. And I think even when you're not teaching martial arts in an overtly spiritual way, you're still trying to convey that, and I think that still has an impact on how you think and feel about violence in general.
Yeah, I completely agree. You should go tell that to Will Smith, Sam. I think he would learn a thing or two. Fonda, I'll toss the same question to you, just in terms of your personal take on, you know, the holistic spiritual sides of martial arts and how that plays into your writing.
Yeah. So I think for me, martial arts has always been a very mentally healthy place to be. There's so many things in your day-to-day life that can be very frustrating, and um, also so much of writing is very isolated and in your own head, and just sitting in your chair. And so martial arts has always been like that counterpoint to me. Like whatever is going on that is frustrating, I can take it out like on the punching bags. When I get to the dojo, like I
Mhm.
can purge some of that. The energy that you have that's kind of like that builds up, and take that out in a safely violent way. And that, like, I always come out of martial arts class feeling better, even like on the days when you're like, oh god, so like I just want to sit in front of the sofa, like on the sofa in front of the TV, and then you drag yourself to class, and then afterwards you feel better because um, there's something about controlled violence that kind of takes down the whatever uncontrolled emotions you've got going on and inside. And I talked about the sort of the complementary nature of writing and martial arts, and I think for me that has always been most prevalent in the fact that like both of those um, arts are about uh, discipline and perseverance more than they are about talent. And that's something that kind of carries through across both of those fields for me. And I think maybe on the page as well translates into how I think about the characters, and like them having all the characters that I've written in my novels have like Goku fighting ability. Like they just have like they're all big badasses in some way, but that doesn't fix their problems. Like that is it's kind of like the Harry Potter syndrome, right? Where it's like they have all these characters have lots of magic, but like that doesn't make life easy for them. And that's the same thing I think um, that I try to convey in the characters that I write, is that they can have a lot of ability in combat, but that's not a quick fix, like and it's the same thing with martial arts. Like, okay, now you got your black belt. It's not like, oh, now you're undefeatable, like you're still going to the gym like every day and having to learn to grow and to keep that up. And so I think to me it's not like a spiritual, like so it's not, I guess it is spiritual insofar as like there's not like, it's not like a worldview so much as like how does how is this personally making me a better person, and how do I think about how what it brings to me and to other people, and like how did my characters who have all these skills still have all these challenges despite all these skills that they have.